CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Andrew Wilson. Our top stories: growing tensions between Russia and Ukraine as the US Secretary of State meets NATO.
Our other headlines: joining forces in the fight against global warming. US envoy John Kerry arrives in China ahead of a climate summit.
A $100 billion bet on the future of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin hits new highs as Coinbase goes public.
And a bitter harvest for French vineyards. Wine producers face massive losses after a frost ruins crops. European and US leaders are weighing up the best way to deal with the escalating conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
With increasing fears that the tensions could lead to conflict, NATO has held talks with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, both flying to Brussels.
Well, let's talk now to our reporter Tony Waterman, watching events for us in Brussels. Tony, European leaders concerned about the tension and troop presence. Bring us up to date with what's being discussed.
Well, Jamie, there were more calls today for Russia to de-escalate this situation on the border with Ukraine and also in Crimea, where some 80,000 troops have been deployed. As you mentioned, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin were meeting with their NATO counterparts today. Those meetings still ongoing, but overnight, Washington extended an olive branch to Russia. U.S. President Joe Biden had a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. During that call, he suggested that they meet in person for a summit to discuss this issue, that face-to-face diplomacy perhaps could go a lot further than just speaking from afar. Russian officials said that they are taking that invitation under consideration, but that it's too early to talk about specifics. From Russia's point of view, they say that these are their troops. They are still within Russia, and the government is allowed to deploy them wherever they see fit, and that they're also responding to a buildup of U.S. and NATO forces at the border. And essentially, they think that this is an internal matter, and they would like to see the United States just butt out of things at the moment. And it looks as if perhaps the situation could escalate at this point. We're expecting U.S. warships to arrive in the Black Sea any day now. Ukrainian military carried out training exercises today right along the Russian border. And there are concerns that the saber rattling could tip into an all-out war. This is something that all sides say they do not want to see. The question is, what is going to be the end result here? We will be hearing from Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Austin, along with the NATO Secretary General, a little bit later today. They're going to debrief the media and the public on what those conversations included, and perhaps we'll get some insight into what comes next.
The previous U.S. administration had a close relationship with Russia. There's now a different approach from Joe Biden. What are we hearing from the United States about this?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Former President Donald Trump was heavily criticized for what was seen as a cozy relationship with the Kremlin. He let a lot of things slide, people say, including Russia's interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential elections, which actually brought Trump to power. And the Biden administration has made it very clear that they will not be going down the same path. You may remember that it was just a month ago or so that Joe Biden said that Putin was a killer, and that would be a comment we almost would never imagine Donald Trump actually saying. But this meeting that is taking place right now is much more than just about diffusing tension along that Ukrainian-Russia border. Of course, that is the main immediate short-term objective, but this is really about the United States re-injecting itself very forcefully in a leadership role, not just within NATO allies and EU allies, but also on the global stage. They want to participate more closely with NATO allies. Trump had threatened to pull the United States out of NATO. And of course, we heard just yesterday that the United States is going to deploy an additional 500 troops over to Germany. So this is about diffusing what's happening at the moment, but also reasserting the United States as a global dominant power.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
The U.S. climate envoy John Kerry is in China for a 4-day visit, the first U.S. official from the Biden administration to visit China. He'll hold meetings with his counterpart in Shanghai ahead of a virtual climate summit to be hosted by President Biden next week. Now, the two are also expected to exchange views on a key UN climate conference, COP26, due to take place later this year in the UK. Kerry's visit comes at a time when the United States is set to announce its new emissions target after rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, and also as China is working to follow through on its own climate commitments.
Achieving the new carbon peak goal and the carbon neutral vision is a huge challenge. It's not easy to achieve and requires arduous efforts, and China only has 30 years to finish its transition. Next, we will continue to carry out in-depth actions to peak carbon dioxide emissions during the 14th five-year plan and the 15th five-year plan period, vigorously boost green, low-carbon and high-quality development, speed up the establishment of a clean and low-carbon energy system. The ministry and other relevant government bodies will make a concerted effort to help key industries such as steel, cement, petrochemicals, chemicals, and non-ferrous metals establish roadmaps, action plans, and supporting policies.
New Zealand is set to become the first country in the world to introduce a law requiring financial firms to report on the impact of their investments on the climate. About 200 companies with assets of more than $700 million and several foreign firms will come under the new legislation. The government wants to make the country carbon neutral by 2050. Denmark has become the first country to permanently stop using the Oxford-AstraZeneca COVID vaccine. The decision comes after links between the jab and very rare cases of blood clots. The European Medicines Agency left individual countries to make their own decisions about administering the vaccine. Denmark's vaccine rollout could now be delayed by several weeks.
All this comes as concerns over the Johnson & Johnson jab threatens Spain's vaccine rollout. The country says it's confident it can meet its current vaccination target, despite an EU decision to suspend its use. Madrid was due to receive its first delivery of the Johnson & Johnson jabs on Wednesday, before the delay over clotting concerns. Let's go live now to our correspondent Rahul Pathak, who's in Madrid for us. Rahul, good to speak to you. First of all, how much of a blow is this EU pause in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as far as Spain's concerned?
Hello there, Andrew. It's definitely a setback. Spain was looking at the introduction of the Johnson & Johnson jab to really give its vaccination programme a huge push. The reason being that it involves just having the one dose. So obviously you can administer the drug to far more people far quicker. Now they were due to start using the one dose vaccine to the 70 to 79 age bracket, and all being well, initially that would be expanded to the rest of the population. So ministers admit that the suspension of the J&J vaccine will, of course, it will cause uncertainty amongst the public, but the fact that they have received such a high volume of the other vaccines says that they're pretty confident that they are optimistic, they said, of reaching their targets. Remember, today in Parliament, building behind me, Pedro Sanchez reiterated his government's target of saying that he wanted 70% of the population vaccinated by the end of July. Andrew?
I mean, we also have the story, Rahul, of Denmark permanently stopping the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine, which plays a part in Madrid's programme as well. I mean, how worried will authorities in Madrid be about their own rollout of this jab?
Well, I think it's important at this stage to put things into some kind of perspective. As of April the 4th, there were 169 cases of blood clots amongst the 34 million AstraZeneca doses that have been administered across the European Union. So, like you correctly said in the intro, the EU is leaving it up to individual states to make up their own decision. And I think Spain would look at those figures and say it's such a minuscule chance of anything going drastically wrong. They're willing to keep administering the jab for now. As I said, it needs to hit that target of 70%, and for that to happen, it's going to need all the vaccines online as soon as possible. And the fact that Johnson & Johnson has been taken out of circulation, it really needs to be using the AstraZeneca jab. And remember, within that though, the states here, the states are very, very powerful here. They're the ones that are in charge of their own individual vaccine rollouts. They could decide individually to stop rollouts of the AstraZeneca jab, and that literally happened 1 week ago with Castile and Leon, irrelevant of what the central government here in Madrid. So I think at the moment they're happy to use the AstraZeneca jab for now, but as I said, for now.
And also, Raul, Spain's economic recovery plan's gone before Congress today. Tell us a bit about that.
That's right. It's been called the biggest economic recovery plan since the 1980s. Then Pedro Sanchez was speaking in Parliament both yesterday and today. $167 billion in EU funds. He said it's going to deliver the greatest economic transformation we've seen in 30 years. He's unveiled the guidelines of the spending plan, which is really meant to pull this country out of the economic crisis that it's found itself in, primarily because of the coronavirus pandemic. Interestingly, the funds haven't been ratified yet by the European Union, but Spain has already earmarked where that money is going to be spent, and a big part of that, $15.7 billion, will be used to boost electric vehicle production. Electrifying transportation is one of the 20 flagship investments that Spain plans to make over the next few years as it really tries to modernise its economy in the post-pandemic world. Andrew?
Rahul, thanks very much indeed. Rahul Pathak there for us in Madrid.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we're on Wall Street next, where the market is welcoming the biggest debut of the year.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The first major cryptocurrency business to make its stock market debut is now trading on the Nasdaq in New York.
Advocates say it's a landmark moment when cryptocurrencies are fully embraced into the mainstream. But critics say it's the epitome of a bubble about to make an almighty pop. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, who's in New York for us. Well, you heard me there talk about the almighty pop. What's the mood on Wall Street, John?
Hey, Andrew. Hey, Jamie. Well, this is a big talker. Everybody is talking about this story here today, and why wouldn't they be? Because we are about to witness the second biggest IPO ever. Now, the biggest was Uber, 75 billion. And then you've got this one at 65 billion, if all goes well, assuming it will go well. And then you look at Airbnb, which is down the list at around 40 billion. So it's pretty big. And, of course, it is a major disruptor coming from California to play in the big leagues here in New York. Not here at the stock exchange, but over at the Nasdaq, which is in Times Square. And you can think of this as a coming out party for cryptocurrencies and Coinbase and all those people who've been banging away for 10 years when nobody like me would listen to them. It's like a coming out party for them because this is them moving into the big time with cryptocurrencies. And I think that Coinbase, as you said, is the first of these companies to come to public markets, so that's exciting. However, we are expecting a day of volatility, and the reason for that, I think there's going to be arguments and haggling and, in some cases, dismay, quite frankly, Andrew, over the value of the company, which is put at $100 billion, the price of the shares and the projections that they're offering for the future. It's a direct listing, by the way, so it will just pop up in a minute on the NASDAQ like it was there forever. Andrew?
And as you say, after all those years of this being on the fringes, is this finally the moment now where the public, who've so far ignored this issue, start to understand what platforms like Coinbase are all about?
Well, I think that's the hope for those who are evangelical about this issue of cryptocurrencies. That is certainly the help. Now, Coinbase is 8 or 9 years old now. It was formed in San Francisco back in 2012. Its valuation has been described by many on Wall Street as absolutely ridiculous. That's $100 billion as of this moment, and it may go up from there. Now, the reason we know this is because last week, under the rules, it gave us its earnings for the first quarter as if it were already a public company. It gave them to the SEC, the leading regulator, and the SEC passed it on to us. And notably, among the details it gave, it reckons it's got 56 million verified users around the world, which certainly surprised a lot of people. And the revenue for their first quarter, according to them, was up by 906%. But there are many, many doubts. And just keeping it focused on the company, the evangelicals say, well, look, you know, Coinbase and cryptocurrencies, they offer enormous growth potential. They offer financial reform globally. This will help areas potentially in Africa, where countries have no financial strong structure at the moment. That could change all of that. So the hope is that there will be a change in the way financial dealings are conducted throughout the world, and that will move the way of fintechs and cryptocurrencies. But those against say, look, your Coinbase business is really based around Bitcoin and another one called Ethereum. And the problem is that, okay, Bitcoin's on a real tear at the moment. It's above 63,000 right now and rising today because of this IPO. They will say, well, okay, evangelicals, how much did Bitcoin go up in 2018? And they look and they say, oh, it went down 75%. Exactly. That's the point. And that's the point. You know, you have to remember these cryptocurrencies are very, very volatile. It could all end tomorrow. They're not backed by anything, you know, like gold is, or the bonds that the United States government offers, essentially backed by the entire country. It's really just a website, say those who are not in favor. And that's why we're going to have volatility today, and it's going to remain a talking point for many days, if not weeks to come. We're just going to have to wait and see. Now, it's actually not trading at the moment. I know that you said it was just now. It's kind of there. They take a very long time at the NASDAQ when they do this. What they're doing is they're on the phone trying to sell it to people. That's what they're doing. And they won't actually release it until everything is done and dusted and they're happy with the price. So at the moment, all I can tell you is that we thought it would go out at $250 per share. It's already trading potentially at $340 a share.
There you are.
Andrew?
It's a brave new world. John Terrett, thanks very much indeed.
Well, to use John Terrett's words, evangelical, let's talk to someone who is perhaps evangelical about this. Jeffrey Tucker, editorial director for the American Institute for Economic Research. Jeffrey, good to see you. Well, I think you are a fan, at least, of cryptocurrencies, if not evangelical. Other people still scratching their heads, asking what this is all about. Is today really a watershed moment?
Well, I think it is a watershed moment, and of course everybody is excited about it for a reason. It does seem like the legitimization of magic internet money in a funny way. I do like the direct listing approach, which is, I would say, more democratic. You know, under an IPO, it's not an IPO. Under the IPO, you have to go crawling around to the big banks, the big institutional investors, and do a dog and pony show for them and a kabuki dance, and then, you know, it's supposedly that stabilizes the price. But we've seen a couple of direct listings this year already that were very successful with companies that have, you know, widespread public recognition and a great deal of democratic market confidence. So this is really kind of a, you know, a sort of, you know, you're sticking it to Wall Street. You know, this is a direct listing. We're going to go directly to the people and see what the market has to say. What's fascinating to me about this, and you won't hear people talk about this much, but, you know, the innovation of cryptocurrency was supposed to be all about disintermediation, you know, peer-to-peer exchanges of value that left out the financial intermediaries, because it has built within it both a medium of exchange and then also a payment system too. That's the essence of what the blockchain is. But what Coinbase is of course a complete suite of on-ramps and off-ramps for all of these various crypto assets, and therefore becomes enormously useful. But in effect, this is bringing financial intermediation to an innovation that was supposed to eschew this stuff completely. So there's a real irony here. I'll say one more thing about Coinbase institutionally. Yes, I've been interested in crypto since those days, and I remember back in 2013 that there were many people trying to come online with exchanges. In fact, there were hundreds, even thousands of very small exchanges. But in those days, the regulators in Washington sent out a one-page fax and said, if you want to be an exchange, you have to register in all 50 states and go through all sorts of hoops, and you have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars and so on and so on. It wiped out the market, leaving only just a handful of exchanges in the U.S. left. Coinbase left through all the regulatory hoops, hung in there all these years, and now they're benefiting enormously. And yes, it does give average investors a chance to get into, sample, dabble in the crypto markets without downloading wallets and copying long codes and risking everything. You know, it's still very difficult to use crypto.
Jeffrey, there's been talk that Coinbase could become more valuable even than some of the banking giants, companies like Goldman Sachs. I mean, is that a good thing? Do you agree with that analysis?
I mean, you know, I don't think it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I do think it's a reality. You know, I mean, as I say, you know, we're heading into a different world where the crypto markets, which are supposed to be disintermediated, are now becoming very much intermediated through these financial on-ramps and off-ramps, and Coinbase is ahead of everybody else on it. And I assume it's going to get bigger and bigger. And the reason for that is, quite frankly, you know, we live in very financially difficult times and troubling times for the U.S. dollar, and Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these other crypto assets seem to offer something of like a safe haven that you can count on. So yeah, a lot of the valuation right now is speculative, but there's a reality behind it, and the reality is that it's a very impressive innovation. We've never seen anything like it in the history of the world. A ledger technology that allows geographically non-contiguous exchange, peer-to-peer, of real ownership in digital assets. So that's a serious thing, and you know, I think there's every reason for that investors are growing in confidence. The Coinbase direct listing that's going on right now is going to boost that confidence even more.
Jeffrey Tucker, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the program.
Thank you.
European airlines are fighting for survival as COVID-19 continues to curb travel. Ireland's Ryanair has lost its court battle to stop EU bailout deals for rival carriers. And meanwhile, Norwegian Air says it needs to raise more than $700 million in fresh capital or faces bankruptcy. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Trent Murray. Trent, good to talk to you. What's the story behind Ryanair? Why has it been going after the EU national carriers?
Well, Ryanair, quite frankly, accuses European governments of playing favours when it comes to handing out state aid to their relevant flag carriers. In this particular case, they took the governments of Denmark and Finland and Sweden to Europe's second highest court when it comes to this type of arbitration. Now, essentially what they say is that those governments have favoured the airlines SAS and Finnair, their flag carriers, and have helped prop them up through the coronavirus crisis with state aid. And frankly, they say that is uncompetitive. Now, a judge hearing that case said that EU state aid laws were not broken for SAS because they said their second competitor was nowhere near close to them in terms of size, so it was not competitive. And in terms of Finnair, they said that it was extremely important to the Finnish economy to keep that airline going. But Ryanair is not happy about this. They have got quite a list of governments that they want to go after when it comes to state aid, including the German government over its handouts to Lufthansa, as well as the French government's handouts to Air France. They said they are going to appeal this particular case, take it even higher. A spokesperson for the airline says that one of the EU's greatest achievements is the creation of a true single market for transport. Today's judgment sets the process of liberalisation back 30 years by allowing Finland, Denmark and Sweden to give their national carriers a leg up. So they are not pleased.
And Norwegian Air, how likely are they to find a helping hand? What's the future looking like for that airline?
Well, Norwegian Air has been in a pretty turbulent period now for some time, even before the coronavirus pandemic. As the name would suggest, it's an airline from Norway. It's not quite. It had quite big ambitions to be a Europe-wide carrier, ordered a bunch of brand new aircraft from Boeing and entered that enormously competitive market across the Atlantic, flying routes like London to New York and Paris to Bangkok. Well, that is all off now. That long-haul operation is being wound back, and they are now just going to focus on being a smaller, more nimble airline in Europe, servicing routes in the Nordic region as well as holiday destinations. But as you say, they are desperately trying to raise some money, around $700 million US before they lose their bankruptcy protection next month. So they will be on the phones, I suspect, as we speak, trying to raise money from investors.
Trent, thanks very much indeed. Trent Murray there.
And staying with flying, the budget airline EasyJet is optimistic about summer travel. The UK-based firm says it expects to start flying a lot more routes from late May. By then, the firm thinks many more European countries will be open to British holidaymakers. Uncertainty remains about when travel can resume and which countries will feature on so-called green lists of low-risk destinations.
Bernie Madoff, the financier who swindled thousands of clients out of billions of dollars, has died in a US prison. He was jailed in 2009 after pleading guilty to crimes which took place over several decades. He was serving a prison term of 150 years.
Toshiba's chief executive is leaving the company, saying he wants to recharge. The Nikkei Financial Daily says Nobuaki Kurumatani confirmed the move. The company's board is meeting to discuss what it called top management issues. There's controversy over a $20 billion buyout bid from Kurumatani's former employer, the private equity firm CVC Capital Partners.
The world's biggest luxury brand company, LVMH, saw its shares rise to a record high in early trading. Sales figures showed it bounced back far more quickly than expected in early 2021, and the numbers were buoyed by the firm's US and China markets. First quarter revenues exceeded those from before the pandemic.
UK supermarket Tesco has reported a 20% drop in pre-tax profits. Britain's biggest retailer said the cost of the pandemic wiped out the benefit of what it called exceptionally strong grocery sales. With restaurants and cafes shut over the last 12 months, supermarkets saw a surge in demand as shoppers stocked up on food during lockdowns.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the cost of coronavirus. French President Emmanuel Macron on the mental health impact on young people as the national vaccine rollout gathers pace.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination program offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, you loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Andrew Wilson. Our top stories. Growing tensions between Russia and Ukraine as the US Secretary of State meets NATO.
US envoy John Kerry arrives in China ahead of a climate summit.
And a $100 billion bet on the future of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin hits new highs as Coinbase goes public. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
French President Emmanuel Macron is visiting a hospital in the city of Reims to discuss the psychological impact the COVID-19 crisis is having on children. Let's talk to our correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, what observations has the President had to make?
Hi, Andrew. Well, he is in the hospital, you can see behind me, accompanied by the Health Secretary and also the Children's Secretary, because President Macron has made much of his focus on the psychological impact of lockdowns, the psychological impact of the crisis as a whole, and specifically the effects on children, teenagers and adolescents as well, university students. He's been meeting some of the people inside because this hospital here in Reims, in the east of France, does have a special unit dedicated to psychological treatment, people who've been admitted for depression. And Emmanuel Macron was speaking to some of those people inside today. One teenager he was speaking to, he asked her what she how she'd got through the last year, how she had got through the start of this year as well, what she had feared the most coming up, and she spoke about an eating disorder, saying that is common to many of her friends as well, suffering anxiety and depression. And she did say that she feared a new lockdown, which the Health Secretary did say that the government is trying their best to overcome the chance of bringing that in, because what we have at the moment, Andrew, although it is to all intents and purposes a lockdown, Emmanuel Macron has shied away from using that language. He says that what we do have at the moment are supplementary braking measures. But if you look at the data that's been analysed over the last year by the French Public Health Authority, they're saying that a third of all French people have suffered either anxiety or depression at some point in this crisis.
And today, Ross, already we've been talking about Denmark and the pressures there, and also Spain. How's the vaccine rollout progressing where you are in France?
Oh, Andrew, that is maybe where we can find some brighter spots, but because if you look at the daily data, the number of cases, the number of deaths, the number of people in intensive care, it is not good news at the moment. France struggling with a third wave of infections, but the vaccination campaign is really now speeding up, accelerating away from the disruption and delay that we saw in January and February earlier this year. France has already hit its target. The government wanted to get 10 million people first vaccinated by this Friday. The number of people who've had their first jab is more than 11 million, so the government has managed to beat that target. The next target is getting 20 million people to have their first jab by the middle of next month. But France has already opened mass vaccination centres at VaxiDrive, the drive-through jab centres that we have seen in some parts of Europe. They have now started to be rolled out in France as well. So that is a ray of hope for some people as well, that the vaccination campaign is going well, despite the problems that we have seen in Europe, particularly with Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. And the next bright spot after this could be the fact that tomorrow Emmanuel Macron will be chairing a meeting of senior ministers to try to work out how and when to end the current restrictions that we have in place here in France nationwide.
Indeed. Ross, thanks very much indeed. Ross Cullen, live for us in Reims there.
Surge testing is taking place in 4 London boroughs as the UK tries to keep new coronavirus variants under control. In the same week, England began lifting lockdowns. A significant cluster of variants have been found in South London. Nicole Johnston reports.
It's a race against time in the UK, trying to contain an outbreak of a COVID-19 variant that was first identified in South Africa. More than 650,000 people in London's south have been told to take a PCR test in the largest surge testing program carried out in the country so far.
So it's a new variant for us in the UK and in England. So all our control measures that we've got in place we think will work against the variant. But of course, what we don't know is whether the transmissibility will be similar or different, as we found with the Kent variant at the end of last year. We found that was far more transmissible. But also, of course, we've got a vaccination programme that we're rolling out at pace, and we want to make sure that our vaccine programme is resilient to any of these variants that might crop up, not just this one, but any in the future as well.
Everyone aged over 11 who works, lives and travels through the area has been told to get tested.
Slightly worrying, I guess, if the South African variant is actually taking hold in Lambeth, but hopefully it's not.
I've been vaccinated twice. I've had both vaccines, so I feel quite protected and privileged. But I was alarmed because there are a lot of very vulnerable people in Lambeth.
Meanwhile, a study looking at mixing different types of vaccines is being expanded. The Oxford Vaccine Group has already enrolled 800 people to find out whether a combination of vaccines for the first and second shots will give longer immunity. Now it's calling for another 1,000 people aged over 50 to join the trial. All this as England emerges from lockdown this week. Shops, gyms and outdoor dining is back, but there's plenty of concern that a new variant could drive the country back indoors. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, South London.
The head of the World Trade Organization has been meeting vaccine makers and government ministers to tackle what she calls the glaring inequity in COVID-19 vaccine allocation. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala wants to talk about scaling up manufacturing, and she's hoping for agreement waiving intellectual property rights for COVID drugs and jabs. Hosukli Makiyama is former EU representative to the WTO. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, sir. First of all, how significant is this meeting?
Well, WTO does not have a natural role in the question of either developing or allocating vaccines. It primarily resolves trade dispute and negotiating trade barriers. So therefore, this meeting should be seen as probably one in many, many meetings ahead in order to avoid a future trade dispute over the pandemic.
But we know that Ms. Okonjo-Iweala is keen to get started on a very full agenda. She's promised to bring energy to the issues that she feels are important. So perhaps we can expect this to shove a little harder than we normally expect from the WTO.
Well, that's very, very true. I mean, the ordinary functions of the WTO has been stuck now for almost 2 decades. So it is actually a very good opportunity for the new Director General to reinvent the WTO by building a new area where it could actually exercise a role. The question is really which. And also she, as a person, she has a long background in, developing vaccines through the Vaccine NGO, which has been basically one of her career paths to this job.
I mean, the WTO's role as an adjudicator has also been, well, let's face it, quite badly damaged by deteriorating relations with Washington. Can we expect the Director General's agenda to be boosted by Washington re-engaging with the WTO and lending some badly needed muscle and influence?
Well, here's the problem with the WTO, which is that it is actually really a member-driven organization, and whereas the Director General and the Secretariat merely functions as stewards. So, in other words, it's really not a question about what WTO can do. It's really a question about what the United States and Europe on one side versus India and South Africa on the other side, what they are willing to agree with the Director General Ngozi as an umpire.
So this takes us, of course, to the question of the vaccines, intellectual property, patent, and all the rest of it in terms of getting these vaccines out to as many people as possible. The WTO agenda is pretty clear, but all the member states will have their own private views about how much they want to give away in terms of ownership of the vaccines.
True, but the truth is that the current rules in the World Trade Organization already allows the members to impose compulsory licensing. In other words, within air quotes, confiscating patents in a time like this. And it has never been disputed. This is a right that already exists. What we are really talking about is actually major pharmaceutical exporters like India that has a keen interest to try to perhaps incorporate and transfer as much technology as possible during the time of pandemic, but also to be able to export its surplus from India to other countries, including United States and the EU, where the patent regime actually stopped them from actually coming into the market.
Hoseki Makiyama, thanks very much indeed for talking to us today.
Thank you.
At least 20 children have died in a fire at a nursery school in Niger. A blaze trapped the victims, some as young as 3 years old, in their straw hut classrooms in the capital city, Niamey. The cause of the fire, which took hold near the school's gates, is still not known. Many of the school's 800 pupils had to climb walls to escape as there was no secondary exit.
Opponents to Myanmar's military rulers have splashed red paint and dye on roads and signs outside government offices to represent the blood of people killed protesting. It's the second day of the country's traditional New Year holiday, and activists have called this new protest a bloody paint strike.
The United States and NATO allies will withdraw all remaining troops from Afghanistan by the September the 11th, the 20th anniversary of the al-Qaeda terrorist attacks on New York and Washington. There are currently about 2,500 US troops in the country, serving alongside 7,000 other foreign troops as part of a NATO coalition.
The enormous Ever Given container ship that blocked the Suez Canal for 6 days has been seized by an Egyptian court as the waterways operators fight for compensation for the disruption. The boat's Japanese owner is reported as saying it won't be paying anything.
In the United States, there's been another night of unrest in Minneapolis. The police and protesters came face-to-face for more confrontation following the death of Daunte Wright, another unarmed black man shot and killed by the police last week. The police shooting, described as god-awful by President Biden, has caused tensions to once again flare. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Dan Williams. Dan, tell us what happened overnight.
Yeah, as you say, a third night of clashes following the killing of Daunte Wright. Now, there was a curfew that was put in place outside of Brooklyn Center Police Station. That came in place around about 10 o'clock. That's around 15 kilometers away from where I'm standing now. But around about 8:30, the police issued a dispersal order. And that was because they say that the crowd, the protesters, around about 1,000 protesters had gathered, were throwing objects, bricks, full cans of soda and the like at police officers. They also say that some of the officers were also maced, and so that's why they say they had to act in order to restore public safety, and they had a news conference where they showed off what they say were a number of those objects that were thrown at the police, and they say that they had to move swiftly, and they say that they will move even more swiftly if such actions continue throughout this week. Now, it comes, of course, after the officer, Kim Potter, who was the officer that shot, according to police reports, accidentally. She says she was reaching for a taser and instead pulled out a handgun and killing Daunte Wright. She resigned on yesterday, along with the police chief of Brooklyn Center. Now, we're hearing reports today that she now faces second-degree murder charges, according to local reports as well. That the latest from there. Now, of course, it remains to be seen whether that will quell some of the tension, some of the anger that is here.
It's already a tense time, though, isn't it, with the Chauvin trial underway? This is presumably just more fuel for the fire.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we are watching this Chauvin trial very carefully indeed, and we know that the defence are continuing with presenting their case. We expect closing arguments as early as Monday, with a potential verdict next week, and so really the authorities really very much on standby for that. You can probably see some of the boarding around here. Most of the downtown area completely boarded up, and so far in this trial we've had lots of twists and turns. There was a further one today with the defence attorney Eric Nelson calling for the judge to acquit Derek Chauvin. Now, this is a fairly common manoeuvre from defence attorneys throughout various different trials. The judge going on to deny that request, and also the defence finding out today that they won't be allowed to call Maurice Hall. Now, he was the person that was inside George Floyd's car at the time of his arrest. He's invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, his lawyer saying that he could potentially incriminate himself. Remember, there were some drugs that were found in that car, so he won't be being called by the defence. And we've also been hearing from an expert witness as well, David Fowler, who's a former chief medical examiner of Maryland. He was saying that Floyd was killed by heart problems, but there were contributing factors such as fentanyl in his system, the police kneeling on him and inhaling car exhaust, but essentially that it was Floyd's heart that gave way, along with his underlying health conditions, having less oxygen than normal healthy levels. He's yet to be cross-examined, so we'll wait to see whether there's any further developments on that.
Dan Williams in the United States, thank you very much.
South Korea is exploring petitioning an international court over Japan's decision to release contaminated water from its wrecked Fukushima nuclear plant into the sea, amid protests by fisheries and environmental groups. Joseph Kim reports now from Seoul.
South Korea expressed serious concerns about Japan releasing contaminated water from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear plant into the sea. The government says the decision could impact the safety of the South Korean people and the surrounding environment.
The government expresses strong regret over the Japanese government's decision to release contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear station into the sea.
Japan says the first release will take place in about 2 years and will meet international standards endorsed by the International Atomic Energy Agency. South Korea's foreign ministry responded by calling in Japan's ambassador to lodge a formal protest. Being one of Japan's closest neighbors, worries are mounting around South Korea, particularly from those in the fishing industry.
It's irresponsible of Japan to make a unilateral decision. Discharging the wastewater could directly harm and have a direct impact on our bodies. I believe what Japan is doing is wrong.
As a Korean, I'm worried because of how close we are. We were already concerned with radiation, but if the release of wastewater is going to further stoke fears.
An alliance of more than 24 civic groups are also protesting the decision. They say they'll do everything in their power to prevent what they call nuclear terrorism.
There are still high amounts of radioactive material inside Fukushima's contaminated water, and tritium is a material that can be measured properly if it is released into the ocean. This would cause severe pollution. The South Korean government needs to consider banning all seafood from Japan.
In addition, some analysts say Fukushima's waters contain significant amounts of other isotopes despite years of treatment. International and local environmental groups also question TEPCO's plans because there is a high level of distrust of the company following years of leaks, spills, malfunctioning equipment, and safety breaches. And so the South Korean government is calling for the transparent disclosure and international verification of the treatment process, saying it will take every necessary measure to putting its people's safety first. Joseph Kim for CGTN, Seoul.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a taste of frost and a lost vintage for French vineyard owners. What does it all mean for wine lovers?
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
French winemakers are counting the cost of heavy frosts, which have devastated the crop across the country. Producers have already had a difficult year because of the pandemic. Elizabeth Gabet is a master of wine and has described the situation as pretty disastrous. I asked her what vineyard owners have been doing to try to protect their vines.
Normally we see lots of bonfires lit and lots of candles, not just to heat the air around the vineyards, but to create like a cushion of dust, of cloud, of smoke to protect the vineyards. But apparently the air has been so cold, it's just gone straight through that smoke. Vineyards have been spraying with water to try and create little ice bubbles around the buds.
What kind of impact will this have on French wine production this year?
Well, there are some vineyards that have said they have lost 100%. So if you've got a favourite Northern Rhone, Hermitage or Côte-Rôtie, there might not be a 2021 vintage. That might be completely wiped out. In terms for most people, Languedoc has lost up to about 50% of their production. So a lot of the wine that we see in supermarkets from the south of France may not exist. And Provence Rosé has also lost a lot of volume. But we won't know for another month exactly how much.
And I'm presuming that farmers, wherever they are in the world, can't really insure their crops. So what's being done to try to look after these French producers and to try to enable them to come back?
There is vineyard insurance. Most years, the insurance will say you claim on the worst thing that's happened. So vineyard owners play a bit like Russian roulette. Is it the hail? Is it the drought? If your vineyard is completely wiped out, they will pay some money. The government is also offering compensation, but this is on top of a year with a lot of income lost through COVID as well. So it is an ongoing, this was the year they were hoping to make up the money. I don't know how much they'll be able to cover it.
I'm guessing one country's disaster is another country's opportunity. I mean, lots of other wine-producing countries will benefit from this, presumably.
I think, well, I suppose so. And northern Spain and northern Italy apparently were also hit, not quite so severely with the frost. But where are you going to get the equivalent of those Northern Rhone, Great Northern Rhone wines? Maybe Australia or California. Hopefully they've got wines of a similar quality also available. California hit by the fires last year, so I don't know if they were hit long term. Provence Rosé, I don't know. I mean, it really does make people sit up and think, where can you get the alternative wine from?
Do you think this is climate change in action, or is it just one of those things that happens to every generation?
Climate change to a certain extent, because the week before the frost, we were enjoying hot, almost summery weather. The lunchtime before the frost hit, I was out in the garden in a T-shirt having lunch. So within 12 hours, we went from a hot, sunny lunchtime to biting cold and snow. So that does strike me as climate change. We're not used to that really extreme changes during the day.
As world leaders try to tackle climate challenges, one species stands to benefit from the global effort. Known as pandas in the sea, the iconic Chinese white dolphin could be brought back from the brink of extinction. Our reporter Susan Chen has the story.
This is Sanyang Bay, a perfect spot to have a close encounter with the rare Chinese white dolphins. Life scientist Long Yu from Peking University has visited this area every year for years.
We have been researching Chinese white dolphins for the past 18 years since 2004. Last year, we went out to sea 113 times. That means we went out for dolphins every 3 days.
Long Yu says Chinese white dolphins in the area migrated from Southeast Asia about 6,000 years ago. There are some 280 of them in Sanyang Bay. Long and her workmates take photos of the dolphins, and they can recognize them from different patterns on their skin. I went out on the boat with them, hoping to see the dolphins up close.
Chinese white dolphins are the only sea mammal named after China.
We got very lucky. Just a few minutes into the water, we met a pair.
Oh, look at that. Chinese white dolphins. So they are first-class nationally protected animals here in China, and some people would call them the pandas in the sea because of their importance.
One-third of Long's observation team are local villagers.
It's very important to include local villagers in the research and educating others about protecting these dolphins.
The team has discovered that Sanyang-based Chinese white dolphins are different from those found in other places.
Chinese white dolphins here look different. Their back fins are shorter. They also have a different skull, a narrow face.
Long says the group of white dolphins in Sanyang Bay is larger and healthier than their counterparts elsewhere, and they have a fairly stable reproduction curve. The ratio between older dolphins to younger ones is 1 to 1.27. But more needs to be done to protect their environment. Industrial pollution, overfishing, and adverse effects of rapid economic development could easily destroy the balance that Chinese white dolphins in Sanyang Bay enjoy today. Xu Xingchen, Sanyang Bay, Qingzhou, Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region.
Now, we all know that robots are taking over the world, but now scientists in Russia have developed droids that are so lifelike they can even pass for being human. The company that makes them has so far sold 10. They're being used in customer support, with one now working at a business centre, helping to scan passports and even fill in application forms. To see more, europe.cgtn.com.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks very much for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We are on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, cgtn.com, and of course the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.